Good evening everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into one of the darkest corners of history, where the name Vlad the Impaler doesn't just conjure images of gruesome stakes, but also inspired the legend of Dracula. Hard to believe, isn't it? A real man who spread fear so deep that even centuries later, his name still sends shivers. But don't worry, this is history before bedtime. No gore here. Just a story told softly, like something you listen to while lying in bed. A breeze at the window, drifting into a land both terrifying and strange. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. You're in 15th century Transylvania, not the Hollywood backdrop with Gothic castles and bats flapping around, but a real valley of thick forests and jagged limestone mountains. You hear wolves howling in the distance, smoke curling from chimneys into the cold evening air. Here, a boy is born into the house of Dracula. His name, Vlad. He is the son of Vlad II Dracula, a Wallachian ruler. Dracula can mean dragon or devil, depending on how you spin it. Either way, the family name already sounds like trouble. Picture young Vlad running across a courtyard, dark eyes carrying something heavier than a child should bear. Then comes the first turning point. Vlad and his younger brother Radu are taken as political hostages by the Ottoman Empire. Imagine being 12 years old, dragged away from your mountain home and dropped into the enemy's palace. This wasn't exactly a study abroad scholarship. More like a lifelong reminder that your father traded you in for political insurance. Inside the cold stone halls of Edirne, Vlad is taught Arabic script, mathematics, and military strategy. Useful, sure, but he also witnesses brutal punishments and public executions. Lessons in fear that carved themselves deep into his mind. It's here that he begins to understand, terror can be a weapon sharper than any sword. And it gets worse. His brother Radu, he thrives. He becomes close, very close, to Prince Mehmed, the future conqueror of Constantinople. Some records even hint that Radu was more than a friend. Historians still debate whether this was fact or smear campaign. But what mattered to Vlad was simple: betrayal. Picture him sitting alone in a dim chamber, hearing distant music and smelling heavy incense from the great hall, while his brother is celebrated and he is treated as a dagger waiting to strike. A boy trapped between two worlds, no longer at home in Wallachia, and never truly belonging in Ottoman lands. That mix of fear, anger, and abandonment shaped him. Vlad didn't grow up on fairy tales and lullabies. He grew up on mistrust, humiliation, and the kind of political chess that makes Game of Thrones look like a family sitcom. And here's the twist: not every hostage turns into a monster. Some learn diplomacy. Some come back wiser. Historians still argue whether Vlad's years in Ottoman hands forged a patriot or created a monster. As usual, the truth probably lies in the uneasy middle. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, remember this: Vlad wasn't the Impaler yet. He was still just a boy in the cold corridors of Edirne, watching, absorbing, waiting for the day he'd return home. The palace air is heavy with incense, thick and perfumed. As you walk alongside young Vlad through the labyrinthine halls of Edirne, Ottoman tiles gleam in the torchlight, their bright blues and golds almost mocking the gloom in his heart. Here, far from the Carpathian forests, he is just another pawn, a bargaining chip to keep his father loyal. You can almost hear the whispers: that boy, the one with the piercing stare, he is dangerous. Vlad grows up under the suspicious eyes of guards and tutors. Every lesson is a test. Every meal feels conditional, as if someone could snatch it away the moment his father falters. And yet, in this gilded cage, he learns. He absorbs languages like a sponge, masters archery, swordplay, even the delicate calligraphy of the East. Ironically, His captors are forging him into the very kind of leader they'll one day fear. Isn't that just history's sense of humor? Like training your future nightmare for free. Still, the humiliation stings. His father, Vlad too, chose political survival over his son's freedom. Imagine the resentment simmering inside a teenager who feels both abandoned and weaponized. It's the kind of grudge that doesn't dissolve with age, it ferments. Meanwhile, his brother Adu flourishes. He's charming, handsome, and unlike Vlad, he bends easily to Ottoman influence. He becomes close to Mehmed, the prince who would later be called the Conqueror. How close? Well, let's just say rumors ran wild. Some chroniclers insisted Radu was Mehmed's beloved companion. Others claimed it was all propaganda meant to shame him. Historians still debate whether this was intimate truth or political slander, but in Vlad's eyes, his brother had crossed into treachery. Now picture the contrast: Vlad standing stiff, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched, while Radu smiles in silks at Mehmed's side. That wedge, driven early, would split the brothers for life. There's another odd little detail: Vlad apparently developed a fascination with punishment methods he saw in the Ottoman courts. Not that he was handed an instruction manual labeled How to Terrify Your Enemies, Volume 1. But he noticed something. Fear worked. It silenced dissent faster than negotiation. People remembered terror more than they remembered mercy. And so he filed it away. The way you might file away a weird childhood memory, like that time your cousin convinced you fish scales were glitter. Only in Vlad's case, the takeaway was, so people obey if they're terrified enough. But life in Edirne was not just harsh lessons and bruised pride. There were moments of sheer absurdity. Chroniclers wrote that Vlad, even as a hostage, insisted on dining alone sometimes, claiming the noise of others chewing distracted him. A teenager with a flair for drama, nothing new under the sun. You almost expect him to roll his eyes and mutter, "Ugh, peasants," in between sword drills. Yet beneath the arrogance was a wound. He was alone. Neither fully Ottoman nor safely Wallachian. A boy stranded in between. And that wound deepened when word arrived from home. His father's political games were catching up with him. Vlad too would soon lose his throne. And both he and Vlad's elder brother would be killed. Think about what that means for young Vlad. You're trapped in enemy hands, powerless to save your family. And when news finally reaches you, it's not rescue, it's tragedy. Rage has nowhere to go, so it hardens inside you. And here's where historians still argue. Did those years twist him into the ruthless man he became? Or was the seed already there, simply watered by betrayal? Some say captivity created a monster. Others say it built a survivor. The truth? Probably a tangled mix of both. So as the night deepens and you're still listening, imagine him, alone in his quarters, staring at the flickering oil lamp, jaw tight, eyes unblinking. In those moments, the boy called Vlad stopped being just another hostage. He was already becoming the legend that would one day keep whole villages awake at night. The wind shifts in your mind's ear, carrying you out of the incense-thick Ottoman corridors and back to the Carpathian foothills. You can almost smell pine resin and hear the crunch of boots on frosted soil. Vlad, no longer a boy but not yet the monster of legend, finally returns home to Transylvania. But it isn't a triumphant homecoming. His father and elder brother are gone, dead in the whirlpool of shifting loyalties and noble rivalries. What Vlad finds is not a warm embrace but a chessboard. Wallachia, his homeland, is split between noble families, Hungarian influence, and the long shadow of the Ottoman Empire. Everyone has a dagger hidden somewhere. You, as listener, can almost picture him standing in a drafty hall, firelight bouncing off his angular face, realizing that every noble at the table is weighing whether to betray him before dessert. Charming dinner company, right? Still, Vlad has ambition. Hostage years taught him languages. war tactics, and, perhaps most importantly, the psychology of fear. He knows he must claw back his family's throne of Wallachia, and he intends to do it with iron will, or iron stakes, depending on the situation. But first, he needs allies. Imagine him moving between Hungarian courts and Transylvanian fortresses, cloak heavy on his shoulders, always speaking with that measured intensity that makes people lean in, but also shiver. He doesn't have an army large enough yet, but he has presence. Sometimes, presence is scarier than numbers. Here's a quirky little detail: records suggest Vlad was obsessed with ritual cleanliness. He bathed often, which was not exactly common in 15th century Europe. While nobles around him were probably dousing themselves in perfume to hide the smell, Vlad preferred to actually wash. A strange contradiction: the man we remember for impalement also loved a good scrub. Perhaps he figured terror works better if you don't reek. Of course, noble support wasn't easily bought. Many boyars, the Wallachian aristocrats, saw Vlad as unstable, too ruthless, and he saw them as treacherous snakes. Not exactly the recipe for lasting friendships. Tension simmered. Imagine a noble banquet where everyone's smiling, yet every smile looks like a knife waiting for the right moment. And hanging over it all was the Ottoman presence. The same empire that held Vlad captive still demanded loyalty and tribute. For Vlad, this was personal. Every coin sent to the Sultan was a reminder of his humiliation. And yet, he had to play along, at least for a while. Historians still debate whether his return was driven by patriotism, revenge, or sheer survival instinct. Did he want to avenge his father, secure Wallachia's independence? Or was it simply that he refused to live as someone else's pawn ever again? The chronicles don't answer cleanly, and maybe that's the point. But picture the scene: a cold evening, torches flickering on castle walls, Vlad looking out over his homeland. In his mind, he sees both ghosts and opportunities. The forests whisper promises. The mountains stand like grim sentinels. And deep down, you sense it: this is no longer just a young exile trying to prove himself. This is a man sharpening himself into something harder than steel. By now, he knows that mercy doesn't last, but fear does. He's back on his own soil, and every step he takes feels like a vow to seize what is his, to punish betrayal, and to never again bow his head to another ruler. And as you're drifting into that calm, drowsy state, imagine the silence of a Transylvanian night broken only by distant wolves. Somewhere out there, Vlad is planning, calculating, promising himself that the throne of Wallachia will be his. The throne room of Wallachia is not as glamorous as a king's palace in Paris or Rome. It is smaller, colder, its walls hung with tapestries that smell faintly of damp wool. But to Vlad, it might as well be the center of the universe. He has seized the seat his father once held, and with it comes the weight of expectation, and the gnawing paranoia that every ally could turn traitor. You can almost see him sitting there, back straight, fingers tapping the arm of his chair, eyes burning into the nobles who bow before him. To them, he is young, ambitious, and maybe just a little unhinged. To him, they are untrustworthy snakes who had a hand in his father's downfall. So he acts quickly. Vlad begins what you might call a house cleaning, although that makes it sound like he just dusted a few shelves. In reality, he tightens laws, punishes thieves and conspirators with an iron fist, and shows the boyars, the Wallachian aristocrats, that their old games will no longer work. And here's the unsettling part: his punishments are not quiet or private. They are public, theatrical, designed to make everyone whisper about them long after the fire goes out. It's as if he understood something about human psychology long before Freud. People remember fear better than fairness. One of his first bold moves was to invite disloyal nobles to a grand banquet. Imagine the scene: long wooden tables, roasted meats steaming, goblets clinking, musicians plucking lutes. And then, Mid-feast, Vlad has dozens of them arrested. Some are executed on the spot. Others marched off to forced labor. And the rest are left trembling. It's the kind of party trick that guarantees your guests never forget you. Oddly enough, despite the brutality, common peasants seemed to respect him. Why? Because his iron laws cut down on theft and corruption. Villagers that once feared bandits now found the roads safer under Vlad's shadow. It's a strange paradox. The people who had the most to fear from him also slept better at night because of him. A quirky detail from Chronicles: Vlad supposedly tested honesty in bizarre ways. There's a story, possibly exaggerated, that he left a golden cup on a fountain in the capital city. No one dared steal it, because they knew what would happen if they did. Was the story true? Historians still debate whether such a cup really existed, or whether it was just propaganda to show how terrifyingly effective his rule was. Of course, word of his severity spread quickly beyond Wallachia. Neighboring rulers watched with a mix of admiration and dread. Some saw a fierce protector of his land. Others saw a tyrant with no limits. And Vlad himself? He embraced the reputation. He seemed to realize that fear could be as strong a fortress as stone walls. When people quaked at the mere mention of your name, armies hesitated before stepping onto your soil. But ruling with terror is a double-edged sword. It makes your people obey. Yes, but it also makes your enemies scheme. Every noble forced to kneel was also plotting in the shadows. So as you lay there, half dozing, picture the flickering torchlight in that throne room. The smell of roasted boar still hangs in the air from the infamous banquet. Vlad sits in silence. A young ruler with the stare of someone far older, already calculating his next move. And in his mind, one promise keeps repeating: betrayal will never go unpunished. The forests of Wallachia are thick and quiet. The kind of place where you can hear your own heartbeat if you stop walking. Imagine riding a horse down a narrow path, trees pressing close, the smell of damp earth in your nose, when suddenly, through the mist, you see it, a field of tall wooden stakes. On each stake, a body, motionless, hanging in eerie silence. This was Vlad's message to friend and foe alike. Loyalty meant safety. Betrayal meant the stake. It wasn't just punishment. It was theater. Executions became open-air exhibits designed to freeze the blood of anyone who passed by. Chroniclers say entire hillsides were covered in impaled victims, criminals, conspirators, even captured invaders. The details vary, and historians still argue whether the numbers were exaggerated by propaganda. But here's the point: the spectacle worked. Stories of Vlad's Forest of the Impaled spread faster than wildfire. Armies hesitated. Nobles thought twice. And here's the odd part: Vlad seemed to revel in the psychological drama of it all. One story claims he once dined al fresco, seated among rows of the impaled, calmly eating his meal while bodies swayed in the breeze. Did he really do this? Or was it an enemy's invention to paint him as a monster? Historians still debate it. But the very fact the rumor exists tells you something about how people saw him. Now, before you shiver too much under the blankets, there's a light to detail. Records suggest Vlad had a strange sense of orderliness. When overseeing executions, he supposedly scolded soldiers if the stakes weren't perfectly aligned. Picture it, a ruler so particular that he micromanaged even the geometry of terror. Somewhere between a medieval tyrant and a very grim interior decorator. But why impalement? Of all things? The Ottomans had used it, and Vlad knew firsthand its horrifying effect. A single stake could silence a village. Dozens could paralyze an army. He had taken what he'd learned as a hostage and turned it into his own brand of warfare. And there was calculation here. Vlad wasn't simply cruel for cruelty's sake. He understood that his small principality was caught between larger powers, the Hungarians on one side, the Ottomans on the other. He couldn't outnumber them. so he out-terrified them. Fear was his fortress. One quirky tale even claims that during a Turkish invasion, soldiers stumbled upon thousands of their comrades already impaled and simply turned back in horror. Whether the numbers were true or inflated, the psychological effect was real. Sometimes the idea of Vlad was more powerful than Vlad himself. Yet terror is exhausting, even for those who wield it. The boyars he punished still plotted revenge. Common folk might respect safety on the roads, but they also whispered prayers whenever they saw the stakes rising. Rule by fear buys obedience, but not loyalty. So as you drift towards sleep, picture that misty Wallachian forest. Torches glow in the distance, and between them, rows upon rows of stakes. Above it all, Vlad rides calmly on horseback, cloak snapping in the wind. Satisfied not because of the bodies themselves, but because of the silence. The paralyzing hush that proves his message was heard. The year turns. And with it, the shadow of the Ottoman Empire grows heavier across Wallachia. Picture the horizon shimmering with dust as endless columns of soldiers march, turbans, banners, curved scimitars glinting in the sun. To most rulers, this would mean certain surrender. To Vlad, it looked like an opportunity to turn fear into a weapon of war. He couldn't match their numbers. The Ottomans had tens of thousands of troops, Vlad had only a fraction. But what he lacked in manpower, he made up for with cunning. Instead of fighting head-on, he turned Wallachia itself into a battlefield. Villages were burned before invaders could use them, wells poisoned, food stores destroyed. Imagine trudging through enemy territory only to find scorched earth, empty barns, and the occasional wolf prowling the ruins. Not exactly a welcoming committee. And then came the night attacks. Vlad and his men struck under cover of darkness, slipping silently through forests, surrounding Ottoman camps, and plunging into chaos with torches and steel. One of the most famous raids happened near Turgovishte, where Vlad's forces targeted not just soldiers, but psychological weak points. He ordered them to dress like Ottoman troops, sowing confusion in the dark. The result? Panic so complete that even Mehmed II himself barely escaped. Here's the quirky twist: some chronicles claim Vlad gave his soldiers specific instructions not just on fighting, but on sound. Yes, sound. They were to scream, howl, clang weapons in ways that made the night echo like a chorus of demons. Historians still debate whether this was fact or myth. But it makes sense. Fear is louder in the dark. And when dawn came, the Ottomans awoke to a ghastly sight. On the roads leading to Turgovishte, tens of thousands of their comrades had been impaled, forming what later became known as the Forest of the Impaled. Imagine the silence of an army confronted with such a vision, soldiers staring, stomachs turning, the will to fight slipping away before a single sword was drawn. Even Mehmed, the conqueror of Constantinople, supposedly recoiled at the sight. He withdrew, unwilling to push further into this land where even the trees seemed to bleed. Think about that, the man who toppled the Byzantine Empire, who stormed one of the greatest cities in history, turned back at the borders of Wallachia, not because he couldn't win, but because Vlad had made victory feel too costly. Of course, such tactics had consequences. The Ottomans didn't simply forget, and Vlad's people suffered in the crossfire. Armies may retreat, but they return eventually. And every raid, every stake planted in the earth, meant harsher reprisals down the line. Still, for a brief moment, Vlad was victorious, not by strength of numbers, but by turning terror into strategy. He had shown that even a small principality could resist a giant if it played to human psychology instead of brute force. So as you listen in the quiet of your room, picture the battlefield after one of those night attacks. The mist clings low, broken shields litter the ground, horses snort nervously in the distance. And there, at the center, Vlad stands, armor-dented, eyes wild. A man who has made fear itself his most loyal soldier. Victory, like wine, is sweet for a moment but leaves a bitter aftertaste. For Vlad, the triumph against the Ottomans did not cement his reign, it unsettled it. The boyars he had once cowed with terror now whispered louder. Old enemies in Hungary eyed him with suspicion. And perhaps worst of all, his own brother, Radu, returned to the stage, this time not as a fellow hostage, but as an Ottoman-backed rival. Picture the scene: Radu, handsome, charming, polished by Ottoman courts, riding at the head of troops supplied by Mehmed II. To the nobility of Wallachia, he looked like the safer bet, less cruel, more diplomatic, and carrying the backing of the most powerful empire around. Vlad, on the other hand, seemed increasingly unstable. His punishments had silenced rebellion for a time, but silence is not the same as loyalty. So rebellion brewed. Nobles began defecting. Peasants tired of scorched earth campaigns. And Wallachia itself seemed weary of being a stage for psychological warfare. Even allies in Hungary grew uneasy. Some sources suggest that Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, began seeing Vlad less as a useful partner and more as a liability, someone too unpredictable to trust. And then, betrayal. Vlad was captured, imprisoned by the very Hungarian crown he had once sought as an ally. Historians still argue over the details. Was it a calculated political move by Matthias? Or was Vlad framed with forged letters suggesting he colluded with the Ottomans? Either way, he was thrown into prison. Now here's the peculiar part: during his captivity, Vlad supposedly kept his mind sharp by impaling mice and birds. Yes, you heard that right. Chroniclers record that he captured tiny creatures, stuck them on bits of wood, and arranged them as if they were miniature traitors. Was it madness? Was it a coping mechanism? Or just a cruel hobby? Historians still debate the accuracy. But the image is hard to forget: a former ruler, reduced to a prisoner, still playing out his obsessions on a smaller stage. Meanwhile, Radu ruled Wallachia under Ottoman favor. For a time, he offered stability. Though whispers say it was more submission than sovereignty. Vlad's reputation as Tsepash, the Impaler, became both curse and shield, feared enough to keep his name alive, hated enough to keep him in chains. But years passed, and politics shifted again. The Ottomans pressed harder into Europe. And suddenly, Vlad, yes, the same Vlad who dined among the impaled, looked useful once more. Hungary released him, hoping to unleash that old terror against the Turks again. It's almost comical, isn't it? The man considered a monster one year is needed as a champion the next. History has a way of recycling its villains. Still, the damage was done. Vlad's authority was weakened, his base fractured, his own people divided. He could claw back power, but the trust was gone. Power taken by fear slips away the moment fear becomes inconvenient. So imagine him walking out of a Hungarian prison, older, more worn, but eyes still sharp. He knows he's been betrayed by nobles, abandoned by allies, overshadowed by his brother, and yet, he cannot stop. The throne of Wallachia still calls to him, even if answering it means walking straight into his downfall. As you lie there, picture a man who has tasted both glory and humiliation. He is no longer the boy hostage, no longer the triumphant warlord. He is something else now, a shadow walking toward the inevitable. The end of Vlad's story doesn't unfold in a blaze of glory but in shadows, rumors, and contradictions. Even historians can't quite agree on the details. What they do agree on is this: his final chapter was as bloody and mysterious as the legend that followed him. Released from Hungarian captivity, Vlad clawed his way back to power with help from shifting alliances. He regained the Wallachian throne, if only for a brief, flickering moment. Imagine him returning to Turgovishte. Older now. Beard streaked with grey. Eyes sharper than ever. The people who once feared him watched silently. Was this the return of their protector or the rebirth of their tormentor? But enemies were everywhere. The Ottomans had not forgotten. Nobles who had once spent the knee were eager for revenge. Even peasants who had once admired safer roads whispered that they'd rather live under someone less terrifying. Rule by fear, after all, is like walking on ice, it cracks sooner or later. His death came suddenly. Some accounts say he was ambushed in battle against the Ottomans, surrounded and slain by sheer numbers. Others claim betrayal, assassinated by boyars, or even mistaken for an enemy by his own soldiers in the chaos of combat. No matter which version you choose, the ending was violent and abrupt, as if history itself decided Vlad's script had run too long. And what happened to his body? Another mystery. Some chroniclers insisted his head was cut off and sent to Mehmed II, displayed in Constantinople as proof that the monster was finally dead. Others whispered that his remains were buried in a monastery, only to vanish centuries later. Archaeologists have dug and searched, but the truth remains elusive, almost as if Vlad himself refused to rest quietly. Here's the irony: while his enemies celebrated his death, his legend grew far larger than his life. Tales of his cruelty, mixed with stories of his fierce resistance to the Ottomans, turned him into both a monster and a hero, depending on who told the story. And centuries later, a certain Irish author named Bram Stoker would stumble across his name and borrow it for something entirely different: Count Dracula. It's strange, isn't it? A man who fought wars in muddy forests, who terrified nobles and emperors alike, is remembered today not for his politics, but for a vampire myth. Some historians argue that this connection oversimplifies him, turning a complex, brutal ruler into a caricature. Others suggest that legends always outlive facts, that perhaps Vlad himself would have enjoyed the way his name became immortal. So, as you let your breathing slow, picture the forests of Wallachia one last time. The stakes are gone now. The torches have burned out. The battles faded into dust. What remains is a whisper carried by the wind. A name that still makes the world shiver: Vlad Tepes. And in that whisper lies the uneasy truth, that fear, once sown, never truly dies. And now, as the story draws to its end, let's soften the pace. Let the edges blur, and allow Vlad's shadow to fade into something quieter. You've walked with him through cold palaces and torchlit forests, heard the wolves at the edge of his land, and seen the flicker of madness in his eyes. It's a heavy tale to carry into sleep, isn't it? But tonight, you don't need to carry the weight of history. Instead, imagine the forest again, not full of stakes, but empty, peaceful. The mist curls low to the ground, and the only sound is the whisper of leaves. Where once there was terror, there is only stillness. The echoes of clashing armies dissolve into the rhythm of your own breathing. History is rarely simple. Vlad was both protector and predator, ruler and prisoner, patriot and tyrant. Historians still argue which mask was his true face. Perhaps, in the end, he was all of them, and none. Just a man, shaped by betrayals, by fear, by a world too brutal to forgive weakness. But as the night deepens, those questions no longer matter. The past can argue with itself. You, here, can let it go. Let the images of sharp stakes soften into wooden posts fading in fog. Let the growls of wolves turn into the hum of your fan. And as you lie there, eyes half closed, remember, every monster in history was once just a child, staring at shadows on the wall. Even Vlad. So let him rest now, and let yourself rest too. Breathe slower. Feel the quiet settle.